You can do a lot of different things in ICE health systems. Most people work on either the patient care or financial side of a clinic, and we often talk about them separately too. But it is important to understand how these two sides can connect. Today I'm going to show you how a treatment charted on a patient's record becomes a financial charge that can be paid, adjusted, sent to insurance, and so on. I want to highlight the end-to-end experience that a single procedure can go through, so that as you're exploring the system in a training environment or planning configuration for your practice, you have a simplified point of reference for how all the different pieces can fit together that you can then apply in more complex situations. Let's get started. First, I'll log into my training environment so we can take a look at our first patient. We're going to look at two patient examples today. The first one, I will go through the workflow without getting into extreme detail about all the variations and configuration options that are possible. I just want to focus on seeing the simplest version of how a treatment charted on a patient's record becomes a financial charge. This is going to be the version that most people need to know to complete their daily work. By seeing the simpler version first, then we can build on that information in the second example. For the second, I will go through the same steps, but this time we'll go slower and focus more on what's happening behind the scenes. For example, what configuration options affect this step, or what is a more advanced version of this step. This is the version that fewer people have to think about day to day, but it's helpful if you're working with financials at a higher level. For example, configuring the financial practice settings, insurance policies, and fee schedules. So I'm going to open up my first patient for today just by searching for them on the top right. It's going to be Ian. So this is Ian's dashboard. And to get started, before I enter a treatment, I want to make sure he's got an insurance policy associated with his record. So I'm going to go to Patient Management, Insurance, and we'll start from here. So I want to add a dental policy, and I can search for it by the policy number or the name on the group. So I know this policy has the word employee in the group, and that number looks right. I get another confirmation of the details here. So all I need to do, enter his subscriber number and the effective date of the policy. So this insurance policy was entered into the system already by someone else. So it's got the coverages, the maximums, and everything done already. So this is all I need to do. So I'll select Save, and we'll take a look. So now this policy is associated with Ian's record. And next, when we enter some treatment, we'll get estimates based on the coverage details that have been entered for this insurance policy. So on the little preview here, you see a little bit of information. You've got the non-ortho and ortho limits. But later on, we can take a look at how this policy actually gets created before it ends up being associated with Ian's record. So I'm going to go to charting now and enter some treatment for today. This is his first appointment, so we're just going to quickly enter an exam code. And then I'm going to enter some bite wings as well. So we've got two codes to work with. All right, so my two codes are showing up in my treatment planning panel. And if I select one of them, I get a little window with some extra information. So I've got the code and description, the status, and then this estimated breakdown. So that's what I want to take a look at right now. The fee for this particular procedure is $250. So that came from our fee schedule. And then the breakdown came from the 80% coverage that's entered for the policy that we just added. So that's where you get the 200 expected from insurance and the 50 expected from the patient. Right now, this estimate is just showing up here in charting. Because this procedure hasn't been completed yet, we can preview it in financials, but an actual charge hasn't been made yet. So what I want to do is mark it as completed and then save it so we can have that procedure show up in financials as an actual charge. Great. So now that those procedures are complete, they'll show up in my financials record for Ian, and I can also see the details of them in the general procedure list here in charting. So let's jump into the financials workspace and see what this looks like now. So there's a lot of information here, and I'll just run you through a little bit of summary information on it from the left to the right. So on the left here, you can see guarantor insurance information for Ian. So of course, he's his own guarantor in this case, and we see that same insurance policy that we added earlier. To the right is where you see his general account status and a lot of balances for different things. So for him, as a patient, he's owing 100, insurance is 400, and then the total balance is 500 right now. So these came from the 2 treatments that we just entered. And the other balances are there for things like making prepayments or working with payment plans, refunds, and so on. Below that, we've got 4 aging buckets configured. So obviously the first bucket is where all the charges are right now. Below those buckets, we've got our action buttons for financials. So we'll be using some of those a little later. And then we've got our tabs with all our transaction information below. Each of these tabs is essentially showing the same information in different ways. So the main tab is going to show us all the transactions in chronological order, whereas the patient payments tab will just show us patient payments, same with the insurance payments tab, and so on. So now that those procedures are marked as completed, you can see that they're showing up as financial charges now in the system. So we've got the $250 for each, and that same expected breakdown of $50 and $200 for the patient and insurance. So right now we could look at making adjustments. If there was, say, a discount for staff or a referral program or something like that, we could use adjustments to adjust the charge amount. We could put these charges on a payment plan, or we could record a payment from the patient right now. But what I want to look at first is getting these charges onto a claim that'll go to insurance. So to do that, I've got the Create a Claim button. So I'll select that. And we've got a few options. So you've got different types of claims that you can make. Of course, you've got predeterminations or prior authorizations. And you see there's a little number there with the 0. So if there were procedures that required predeterminations based on how the insurance policy was configured, then that button would show a count of that, and you could select that to get your predeterminations created. Now, in my case, I just want to create a regular claim, and so I'm going to be using the Submit Claim to Queue button that has the number 2. So that's looking to see what procedures or charges are eligible to be put on a claim for Ian. And in this case, it's the 2 that we just added. The Courtesy Claim and Create a Claim manually options follow the same sorts of steps, but you'll be picking the charges to put on the claim as opposed to having them go automatically. So I'm going to select Submit Claim to Queue, and while that's processing, I'll let you know what's going on. So what this button is doing is creating a claim with these charges that are eligible to go on an insurance claim. And that's going to go to our claims queue. The claims queue is where we can review all the claims that are ready to be looked at and then approve them and submit them as a batch. This gives you the opportunity to oversee all the claims coming out of your practice and work with them as a group. So if I was a front desk person, I could have selected Create a Claim and submitted the claim to the queue, but maybe I'm not the person that's going to be going through those claims in detail, and that's all I need to do, and so I'm done for now. So let's take a look at what that queue looks like and go from there. There is also a tab for claims here on Ian's record. So I'll select that, and we'll see that now he's got a claim in here with the information that we just added. So I've got my 2 procedures. It's going to be a paper claim because that's how this environment is set up and that's how this insurance policy is set up, but it could be electronic as well. And if I scroll to the right, I can see that the claim is set as open because it's been generated but not reviewed yet. And I could preview the ADA form, maybe print it for the patient if they needed it, or just cancel this process from here. But what I really want to do is go to the next step and look at our claims queue. So that's under Practice and under the Insurance section of Practice. So from here along the side, you can see there's an area for batches, and this is where I can see all the batches of claims that I've got ready in the queue. Now for me, I've got a paper dental queue, but I could also have an electronic dental one, an electronic medical, and a paper medical, depending on my practice settings. But to keep things easy for training, I'm just working with dental paper claims right now. So I'll select this, and we can see our queue of claims in the paper dental batch. Right now we've just got the one claim because this is the first one that's come in. And what I can do here is see the same information we were looking at in the Claims tab, but now I have the option to approve or put this on hold. So what that lets me do is select this edit option here to see a summary information of the details that are about to go on this claim. So we can make a few changes just to make sure everything's correct. We could change the fee on the claim if that was needed. We can remove one of these charges from going on the claim if it shouldn't be there. Add remarks for submission, add an NEA number if we're going to be submitting enclosures. But let's say that I'm happy with what was generated here and I'd like to submit this claim. So I'll just close out of here because I haven't changed anything. And we'll mark this claim as approved. Now, if this was something that I did once a week or every other day, I might have a number of claims in the queue. And so if I had, let's say, 3 in this case, I could mark 2 of them as approved and 1 on hold. And when I submit that batch, only the approved ones are going to go out so that I can fix up that one that's on hold, maybe cancel it and make a correction, whatever I need to do to make that claim look correct. But we're going to say I'm happy with this one here. We're going to mark it as approved and then submit the batch. So that's great. My queue is empty now, which is exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to go back to the batch screen. And now we've got a new entry in the table below. So this shows me that I've submitted a batch of claims, and in this case, it's just got the one claim in it. There's a total amount for all the claims in this, and I can select a PDF icon here to see the ADA forms that have been generated. So if I had submitted a batch that contained multiple claims, then we'd have one gigantic PDF that we could print out and mail in the case of paper forms, or reference for the future if we had to. Now I don't need to print this one right now, so I'll just close and we'll move to the next step. Let's say we've submitted this claim to insurance and we've received a response from them in the form of an insurance payment with an explanation of benefits. So what I'm going to look at doing is showing how we get that payment into the system and then allocate it to different charges. So I'm going to go to payments here under practice, and we start right from batch payments. So what I can do from here is create a batch that contains a number of payments that need to be allocated. They can be insurance or patient payments, but most often they'll primarily be insurance payments. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new batch so we can have a place to put the payment that we've received from insurance. So I'll select Add New Batch. I'll say it went into our lockbox at the bank. Put in my batch number that we use for tracking and say that it was deposited yesterday and that the total of the entire batch is actually $4,000. And that'll be made up of a number of individual payments, most likely checks or electronic transfers. So if I had a batch summary that explained the breakdown of all the payments in this batch, I could attach it or scan it if I had a paper copy. But I don't have one with me right now, so I'm just going to save the batch. And now we've got a new item in the list. So this is from today. The batch itself is $4,000, but we haven't actually entered any payments into it yet. So the total payment amount is 0. So I'm going to go over here and select payments, and we'll start entering some details. So let's select add payment. And let's say that the first payment that's in this batch was for our local clinic group. It was from the insurance payer, ICE Dental Insurance, which is where our policy for Ian comes from. The payment itself came in on the 12th, and it was for $1,000. So I'll just finish filling out the details, make sure we get the check information in there, and we're almost good to go. So if I had the EOB, I could attach it to this payment or scan the paper copy so that we'd have something for easy reference. But I'm just going to reference it on the side here while we work through this. So I'm going to save that, and when I select save and add another payment, it keeps up this screen so that I could add the next payment in this batch. Could be from the same insurance payer, could be from a different one, could be from a patient, doesn't matter. But in this case, I'm just going to work with the one to keep it simple. So I'll close out of here, and we can now see our one payment that's in there. So this $1,000 payment from insurance isn't all for Ian. So I just need to allocate a portion of it to his charges. So as I scroll through here, I can see some summary information about the payment and then some action buttons on the right. So allocate is the one I'm going to use most often to allocate this payment to any number of charges on different patients. The history will show me that history of allocation as it gets more complicated. I can refund a portion if I need to, and you can create a non-patient payment charge against the insurance company if you need to as well. So I'm going to go for allocate, and we'll get a portion of this payment allocated to the charges on Ian's claim. So first thing I'll do is open his patient. So it's at the top of the list here because we've been working with it recently. And what this is going to do is pull up the charges that he's had submitted on claims to the ICE Dental Alberta Insurance. So let's start with an easy example. Our fee on each of these was $250 each. We expected 80% coverage from insurance, and let's say that's what happened. So that means this insurance payment was for $400. And now I've got to assign this 400 to the charges that he's had on his claim. So I'll come here, enter 200 on this one, and enter 200 on this one. So remaining amount has gone down to 0, which is great, and I can save that allocation. Now in our second example, we'll look at a more complicated version of this, but I'll just run through really quickly what some of the other options are. So in the case that insurance paid less than the 80% of what you expected, you'll have to account for that difference in one way or the other. So that's what all these tools along the right here are. So if the charge was denied for some reason, it was missing information, or there was an issue with the patient's age or maximums, we could add some denial codes and get that fixed. If you had a contractual agreement with this insurance payer, you could use the contractual adjustment to correct the fee and then keep track of that difference for reporting in the future. That way, you can be very clear on the amount of contractual adjustments you're making to determine how beneficial that relationship is. You could make adjustments like write-offs if something's not going to be paid at all. The crosswalk codes let you crosswalk codes from dental to medical insurance or medical to dental. So in this case, if he had secondary insurance that was medical, we could transfer the remaining balance to them and make sure we're using the right medical codes. And then the transfer tools let us transfer balance from the primary insurance to either secondary or the patient. So if Ian only had primary and insurance didn't cover that full 80%, we could transfer the remaining balance to the patient to pay. You can add your reason codes explaining why these decisions were made. And then if for some reason insurance has overpaid, you can handle that overpayment in a number of ways, including a refund or a credit on the insurance account or on the patient account. So there's a lot we can do here, but I'm going to keep it simple for now. And we'll just say that insurance paid what we expected because our estimates were correct and our fee schedule was correct. So I'll click Save Allocation. And what that's going to do is allocate that $200 to each charge and update Ian's record. So let's go take a look at how that looks. I'll open Ian's record and we'll go to his financials. All right, so it looks a little different since we were here last. Ian's patient balance is still 100, but the insurance balance is 0 now that it's been paid off. And when you look in the main tab here, you can see that there's 2 new transactions that have showed up. And so that's the $200 from the check on each charge. So a total of $400 to get insurance's balance down to 0. Now, one thing that can be helpful is to look at this information in the Detail tab here. So it's the same information, but it's just grouped by procedure. So you can see exactly which transactions go with which procedure. So in this case, we have our evaluation, 200 was allocated from insurance, and then the balance on this line is 50, which is the balance that Ian owes on both of these. If during the allocation process we had to do a transfer, contractual adjustment, deal with an overpayment, all that information could show up here as well. But what the great thing about the payment allocation process is that you can get a lot done very quickly without jumping from individual record to individual record. You've got your large payment and it's got to go to a bunch of people. So you're working primarily from one spot to get that done. So the next thing that we can do then is record a patient payment from Ian for that remaining $100 balance. So to do that, I'll select Make a Payment here, and this will open up our Simple Payment screen. So I'll make sure we're making a payment for Ian. It's for our local clinic group, and this was all done in our Glenmore Court clinic. The payment amount is 100, so we'll say he will pay everything off in this case. It'll be at our front desk, and I'll make sure it's set to cash. Now this is our simple view. There's a detailed view that we have as well, so I'll switch to that really quick. So what this lets us do is be very specific about how that $100 is allocated. So say, for example, it was only going to be a partial payment of $50. I could choose exactly which procedure is going to get that $50 first. Now, in the simple payment view, it's going to make that decision automatically based on first in, first out. So whichever charge is the oldest, that's what gets allocated payment first. So I'm going to switch back to simple view because this is what I'd use most often, and just select make a payment. So when that refreshes, we can see now there's 2 new allocation lines for each of these charges. We've got 50 allocated to the evaluation, 50 allocated to the bite wings. And if I go to the main tab again, you can see that there was a single payment made there of $100 from Ian. I'm not seeing exactly where it went, but I can always come here and double click on it to see the payment details and see how that allocation worked out. If I wanted to be fancy here and we had only recorded a payment of $50, I could switch where that allocation was going. So if it had been put on the bite wings, I could move it to the exam here. But in this case, I'm happy with how it's worked, and of course it's all paid off. So I'll close out of here. So we've taken a procedure that was entered on the treatment plan through charting into financials. We've put that on a claim. We processed that claim. We've allocated the payment that we received in a batch from insurance. And then now we've come here to double check the details and pay off the patient side of that balance. So it's been a lot to go through really quickly. But the last thing I want to mention here is just on the dashboard. So when I'm on the dashboard, there's a financials panel that I can see. And for some people, it could be that the things that they need to do, they can get done just with the financials panel. They might not need to go into the main financials area there to do their work. And sometimes that can be nice because there is a lot of information accessible in the main financials area. In the financials panel here, you can see the same balances, but there's also a menu icon in the top right corner of that panel. And so when I select that, there's a few different financial related actions I can take. The first one is, of course, to make a payment. So selecting this opens up the same simple or detailed view that we were just looking at. And so I could make a quick payment at the front desk without having to worry about allocating it or getting into all the details. I could use the general ledger option to see recent transactions. I could generate an ad hoc statement for printing for the patient that would show all their account activity, what balances they owe, what payments have been made in a certain period of time. I could submit a claim to the queue, just like we did a few minutes ago. I could make a courtesy claim from here and print that and share that with the patient before they leave. And I could also start the predetermination process from here as well. So just a few things to keep in mind as you're working through this. We did touch on a lot of different areas, but there's some basic functionality available right from the dashboard to make people's lives easier depending on the types of work they're doing. So that's everything I wanted to go through on the first version. What I'd like to show you now is a second patient. We'll go through some of the same steps, but this time we'll go slower and focus more on what's happening behind the scenes. So what sort of configuration options affect this step, and what are some more advanced things that we might want to keep in mind. For our second patient, I'm going to log out from the current provider that I am now and log in as a specialist. This way, when we work on our second example, we can see how the fees are different because our provider, Corinne, is a specialist. So the patient we're going to be working with today is Dana. So I'll search for her and open her record. All right, the first thing that we'll do is go to patient management and make sure Dana's set up with an insurance policy. So I'll add the same policy that we used before just for consistency. But of course, she'll have a different subscriber ID number. All right, So when I added this before, I mentioned that the insurance policies are configured at the practice level. So for me to be able to add this policy, it had to be created already. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'll go to practice, and under insurance is where that work will be done. I have a few different policies and payers set up already, but I'm going to look at the one that we've been working with Ian and Dana. So I'll search for the payer's name. And in this case, the insurance payer name is called ICE Dental Insurance for my training purposes. So I'll open that up. I could create a new insurance payer, but I want to go through an example that's been filled out already so you can see some of the things that are possible. So there's some basic information up at the top for the type of payer that they are and what kind of forms we're going to be using. But the thing I'm most interested in is this table below with the addresses. So the way that the insurance payers are structured is you have an insurance payer at the highest level, then you have addresses, and within those addresses, you have policies. So in this case, I've got two addresses set up for this payer, and it's set up in a regional way. So ICE Dental Alberta and ICE Dental British Columbia represent provinces, but the addresses can be flexible, and you can create whatever groups within the insurance payer that you need to. So for me, I want to look into detail about this ICE Dental Alberta address. So I'll highlight it here and select Edit, and we'll see what was in here. So we've got a little bit more detailed information, standard things like a name and abbreviation to help us search for this when we're working with insurance, but also things like a timely filing constraint or whether or not they're using electronic submissions. We, of course, have contact information here. And then at the very bottom, you can see a table where I've got the list of policies associated with this insurance address. So I could add a new policy here, but I want to take a look at the one that we've been using. So it's the first one in the list here, the UFC employee group policy. So I'll select the edit icon and we can see the details. So if we were creating a brand new policy, we would also see these fields, they'd just be empty, but you have a lot of options here. So setting names and numbers that are accurate, the type of policy that it is, you've got your different options here, when the policy became active or inactive, if that's relevant, the anniversary, when the maximums reset, and the type of assignment that you're working with. So these are all options that could be configured in the beginning, but what I'm most interested in are the coverages and exceptions below. So as we scroll down, there's a section for employer details. So the employer in this case is the University of Calgary, and we've got their information. If I keep scrolling, we'll get to the benefits section I mentioned. So the first table for benefits lets you set up some standards like copay and the different types of maximums that you might have. So ortho, non-ortho, and what the deductible is, how frequently they reset. But what I really want to see again is the coverages and exceptions table here. So we've got our different categories, and as you look along the right, these are the settings for this policy and that category. So let's take a look at preventative, for example. So it's set as 80% coverage with a yearly limit. The deductible is waived. And as you keep going along, there's more and more options to consider that would be set for any procedure code in this category. Now, what can be really flexible is you can set exceptions to codes in there. So you can see on my exceptions button, there's a number 2 because some have been set up already. So I'll select that so we can see what kind of options we have. So in this case, there have been 2 exceptions made for fluoride, and as I scan through the table, it looks like they're set to be excluded from any claims for this insurance payer. So they don't actually cover any fluoride treatment. So if I were to enter a fluoride treatment in my charting area, I want to make sure that the estimate is $0 from insurance because I know the insurance policy isn't going to pay for that. I'm going to show you the add exception options so you can see what some of the other options are. So you could change coverage types from percentage to dollar, set a max dollar amount for certain things that are only covered that way as opposed to a percentage. If there's limits on the number of occurrences or frequency, if you've got age restrictions for things like fluoride or sealants, and then whether or not these codes require predeterminations, diagnostic codes, that's the ICD-10, if they require referring provider to be included, or if you just want to exclude this particular code from a claim at all. There's a lot that you could play around with here depending on the details of the policy, but I'm going to close out of here now that we've seen some examples. Now that we've seen behind the scenes on the insurance policy, Let's go back to the patient and add some procedures in charting. I'm back in charting now for Dana, and I can see on the right that the insurance policy was added to her account, so we're good to go. So I'm going to add the same procedures that we worked with on Ian, so we've got the same point of reference. So we had our exam, and we had our bite wings. So this time when I select one of these procedures to see the details, we'll notice something a little different about the insurance estimate section. So in this case, instead of the total fee being $250, which is from our default fee schedule, it's now actually $400. And that's happening because Corinne has a special fee schedule because she's a specialist. So when I added this procedure, the system took a look to see what fee schedule to use. And it does this in a particular order. So the insurance split is still accurate. It's 80% because we just saw that, but it's 80% of 400 in this case. While we're here, I'm going to mark these procedures as completed so they move into the financial section, but then we'll take a look at the fee schedule configuration options to help explain how this is working. So in the practice settings, I've got all my different configuration options for the different areas. But I just want to take a look at the financial options right now. And of course, we have a section here for fee schedules. So how I have my practice set up is that we've got 3 general fee schedules to work with. The first is our default fees used by all clinics. Then I have a specialist fee schedule that's only used for treating providers that are set as specialists. These fees tend to be higher. And then the third one I have is a community outreach fee schedule. We run a community outreach program through one of our other clinics, so any treatment happening at that clinic will use this fee schedule, which generally has lower fees. So when that procedure was added to Dana's record, the system was looking at a few different things, and this determines what fee gets used. I'm going to open up the help icon up here to help us talk through this a little bit. So the way that fee schedules are determined is based on the order you see in the list there of patient, provider type, clinic, clinic group, and default. At the most detailed level, the system checks to see if the patient has a specific fee schedule assigned to them. And if they do, that's going to be the fee schedule that they use when treatment gets added. The next level up is the provider type. So when I add a procedure, the system looks to see that me as a provider, if I have a special type assigned, is there a special fee schedule associated with that? If there is, and there isn't one at the patient level, then we use the provider type. Now let's say for a different person, they're entering treatment. So the system checks the patient level, there's nothing there. They check provider type, no special fee schedule there because they're a standard provider. But they're working in a clinic that has a specific fee schedule. So that's the one that'll get used. And the same concept applies to clinic group. And then if there's no special scenario based on the details of the procedure that's entered, then we use the default. Because this process happens, the clinician that's entering the treatment doesn't have to worry about picking a specific fee schedule. If they're logged in as themselves, and the procedure details are accurate to the clinic where the treatment's happening, then everything will just work automatically and the right fee schedule gets used. Now I only have 3 fee schedules set up in this example, but you can have any number that's useful for you. And I do that to just help keep it easier to explain because most people have experience working with specialist fee schedules or clinic-based fee schedules. If you wanted to go into a bit more detail on this, you could take a look at how the different rates are set. So when I select the gear icon, I can see all the values for the different codes on this fee schedule, and I could update them. So I could change individual fees, increase them by a percentage, that sort of thing. But I'm not going to make any changes here. We've seen how when I add a treatment, it pulls in a fee and how that fee can change depending on the details of that treatment and what fee schedules are involved. So I'm going to go to Dana's financials record and we can see how that's looking. So we've seen this before. The balances are a little bit different because of course the fees were higher. So you see 2 charges for 400 with the estimated 80% breakdown again. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a claim so we can get to that step in the process. Now, when I select Submit Claim to Queue here, there's another advanced thing to keep in mind. As a practice, you can set up automated tasks to run this process at certain points during the week. So if that were the case, I wouldn't have to remember to click Create a Claim and click Submit Claim to Queue. It could run automatically every evening, every few days, once a week, whatever it is that makes sense for you. And then whatever charges are eligible to be put on claims will be put on those claims, and they'll show up in the queue for review. So that helps make sure that claims aren't missed because someone forgot to click the button. And then whoever it is that's reviewing those claims just has to work primarily from the practice level because they're reviewing the claims in the batch. So let's go look at that batch right now and see what we've got queued up. So go to Practice Insurance again, and we'll go to Batches. So it's in my paper queue because those are my settings for the policy, and here we are. So I'm going to scroll over and look at the edit options again. Now we didn't change anything for our first one, and I'm not going to change much here, but I'm going to show you a few different things. So you've already seen that you can update the fee on the claim, delete a charge from here, but one thing I didn't point out was the option to edit the providers. Now a billing dentist and a treating dentist are showing up here automatically to be put on the ADA form, and these can be configured at the clinic level, clinic group level. If an insurance policy has specific billing dentists or treating dentists they require, you can do that as well. And then as you can see here, you can override that billing or treating dentist if it's been incorrectly set up. So these billing and treating dentists, they've been set up in the system and they've got all the required information that's going to need to show up on the ADA form. So that way you know that the ADA form is getting all the right detail and your claims aren't going to be denied just because they're missing some information. So I'm happy with these choices here. I don't need to switch them in this case. Just cancel out of here and we'll keep going. So in addition to removing charges on a claim, I could add procedures that for some reason didn't get put on this claim. If we'd been submitting this as an electronic claim, I could drop it to paper. And with the claim type, it's set as a regular claim because those are the settings for the insurance policy. But if I needed to make it a courtesy claim, I could do that and share that with the patient so that they could share their details to be reimbursed directly from insurance. So I'm happy with how this is looking, so I'll close out of here. We'll mark it as approved and submit this batch. So now that this claim is submitted, we'd wait for our response from insurance and we can look at allocating a payment that we receive from insurance. So I'm going to do that now. Let's go to the practice payment section so we can look at the batch payment. And this time I'm not going to make another batch. I'm just going to say we have another payment inside of it that we've received. So I'll select payments. And so you can see the payment we entered earlier for the 1,000. In our process, we allocated 400 of it, so there's still 600 left to go. So if this payment and the EOB that came with it included the details for Dana, then we could use this 600 to help pay what we're looking at. So I'm going to do that in this case rather than enter another payment to show up. But this time we'll do things a little bit differently. So I'll scroll to the right and select allocate. And so this is still an insurance payment from Ice Dental Alberta. It is for our patient Dana this time. And so when we pull it up, we see Dana's information that was submitted on the claim to Ice Dental Alberta Insurance. So there's a few different things we can look at. So in the first example, we mostly looked at this from the perspective of allocating a payment, but some people also refer to it as EOB processing. So meaning we're taking that response from insurance and either marking payments or making changes to those charges to account for how the claim ended up being adjudicated. So instead of saying that insurance paid everything exactly how we expected, I'm going to work through a scenario where they didn't and some of the things that we can do. So I'm going to start off here and say that for the first charge that we have, the exam charge, that was paid correctly, so that'll be 320. But for some reason on the second one, they only paid 160. So we'll put in the total payment then of 480, put in our 320 on this one, and then this one was 160 only. So when you're working through the allocation, your main goal is to get these two numbers to match. So if I scroll to the far end, you'll see I've got a remaining amount of 0, which is great. That's what I want on each line. But for my second line, I still have 160 left over. And of course, that's because insurance only paid 160 of that. Now, there could be different reasons for that. One might be that we just had our estimate wrong, and on this, there was actually a maximum involved. Maybe the percentage was wrong, and so insurance is just going to pay 160, and we're transferring that remaining balance to the patient. So to do that, I would use my transfer codes to transfer from my insurance to Dana, and that'll automatically pick up the 160, and then we're at 0. So then once I save this allocation, the first line would go through just fine. And on the second line, we'd record a payment for 160, and we'd also get that transfer of 160 to Dana. So she's now owing that 160 in addition to the original amount that we estimated based on 20%. That's one option. But let's say it's something a little bit different. So I'll remove those from the transfers options, and we still have to deal with this 160. Another common situation might be that actually the reason that we're only receiving 160 is because we have a contractual agreement with this insurance payer. And for this particular code, we're not allowed to charge the 400 fee, or we've agreed not to charge the original 400. So that's why they're paying 160. So it might be that our contractual agreement is that I should only be charging 200 for this particular procedure. So what I can do is add a contractual adjustment code and then put in the value of 200 to address the difference between what fee was on the claim and what the contractually agreed upon fee is. So the benefit of doing this is that we also get to report on this information afterwards. I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but we can see through reporting how many contractual adjustments we're running and the value of those contractual adjustments, so that if we're in this relationship for a certain amount of time, we have a sense of how much money we're losing or potentially gaining depending on the benefit of this relationship. So instead of having separate fees where we never get to see this difference of 200, it's automatically included in this process. So we had our 400, it was contractually reduced to 200, so that's where the 160 came from, because they paid 80% of 200, which is 160, and so that's going to leave us with something over here. So what I'm seeing here is a negative $40. And what that means is that we're carrying a sort of credit on this line right now. And because we have this contractual agreement and insurance is paying less, we also have to charge the patient less. So we're not allowed to just shift the remaining cost, that extra 200 to the patient. Their amount paid is going to be less as well. So similar to what I was doing before I entered the contractual agreement, I can now transfer the balance on this line to Dana. So it's going to be a transfer to Dana, and it's going to be a 40 credit, and that'll get our line down to 0. And so what this will do then is once everything's allocated, the amount that Dana owes is going to be 20% of the contractually agreed upon fee. So there's a lot going all in at once, but we get to do it all on one line, all in one step, as we're allocating or processing the explanation of benefits. Now, the last thing I'll point out is that because we are adding a contractual adjustment, the reason code for that is being automatically added as well. So it's a participating write-off. And for any claim, you can use this button to add the claim reason codes as well. So you've got a record of that. So I'm going to scroll over to the side, make sure everything's looking good, and then select Save Allocation, and we can go see how that looks on Dana's record. All right, so we're back at Dana's record. And just like when we came back to Ian's, we can see the insurance balance is to 0. And we've got a few more lines in our main tab here. So I'm going to go through a few things, but I'm mostly going to look at the detailed tab because it's going to group the information a little bit better. Just by taking a quick look, you can see that payment allocation of 320, then for 160, with the contractual adjustment of 200 to make sure that our fee matches our contractually agreed upon fee with ICE Dental Alberta Insurance. And then how the offset or the credit remaining on that line was transferred to Dana so that she had the appropriate patient balance left. But let's take a look at the detailed tab. So at the very top, we've got our valuation, and this was the one that was done very simply. We expected 320 because that was 80% of the fee, and that's what we got. So the balance on this line is 80, and that's 20% that we expect Dana to pay. But the next line is the one that's more complicated because that's where we did all our work. So it starts out very similar. We've got 160 coming off, so then the total charge is 240. Because we've got a contractual adjustment added in these next three lines, that's where the 40 credit is being transferred to Dana from this process of working with the payment allocation. Then you see the contractual adjustment total for reference, which leaves us with 40. So this is great because if the fee had originally started at 200, 20% of that is 40. So that's where we're getting this number from. And the savings are accurately passed on to Dana while still giving us the opportunity to report on how much we're contractually adjusting later on in the process when we're doing our financial reports. At this point, we would make a payment from Dana for the remaining balance. I'm not going to do that here because we already looked at doing the simple and detailed version of that, and there's no extra depth I wanted to go in on that one. So this is everything I wanted to go through today. We covered a lot in a short period of time, so I want to recap the main points really quickly. The simplest version is that we looked at how a treatment charted on a patient's record becomes a financial charge. So that involved adding an insurance policy to the patient, and this was something that we later saw was configured at the practice level with very detailed coverages and exceptions. We then went and charted treatment so that we could see what fee was showing up and how the coverage estimate was generated based on the fee schedules and based on how our insurance policy was set up. We then marked that procedure as completed, which made it appear in our financials area as a charge that was ready to start aging. And so we made sure that those charges were put onto an insurance claim. We reviewed the details of the claim before approving it and submitting it officially. Then we received a response from insurance in the form of a payment and EOB. So we made a new batch, added a payment to that batch, and then allocated that payment to the charges from Ian first, and then later to Dana, while also doing some more complex contractual adjustments on that particular allocation. And then at the very end for Ian, we entered a patient payment so that the procedure that had started in charting and become a financial charge went from its full cost to zero by the end of the workflow. If you're interested in learning more about financials and insurance in the system, you can also look into some other topics that we didn't cover in detail today. For example, you could look at doing these same workflows but with a secondary insurance as well. You could look at putting charges onto payment plans and setting up payment schedules. You could spend more time configuring the insurance policy coverages and exceptions. You could look at making predetermination claims and setting that as required for certain more complex treatments. You could play around in the reporting area, see how you can report on all the things that we just did here in financials. And finally, you could look at treatment consent forms. Now, these are forms that are created in the charting area, and they'll show planned treatment, how it's organized, what the expected fees are, and what the estimated insurance coverage might be. So these are something you would use for financial counseling, making sure the patient was up to speed on what was going on. And there's some flexibility there on what the actual document looks like because it's built using our document system inside of practice settings. So between these topics and all the things we've explored today, there's a lot to keep you busy and productive. So I encourage you to explore the help material or try the workflows yourself in a training environment.